Recently, FineMark Bank sponsored an event in cooperation with the National World War II Museum. Shell Point veterans were recognized, and Dr. Gordon Mueller, president of the museum, spoke to the audience about this landmark located in New Orleans.
The museum's mission is to tell the story of the American experience in World War II. We're not telling the story of the Brits or our allies, the Soviet Union. We're not telling the stories of the enemy so much, except when we're in battle with them. We're telling the American experience. It's America's National Museum. Why it was fought, how it was won, and what it means today. Those are the three pillars of our museum story, not just in our exhibits, but also in our programs, our educational programs, our overseas tours to battle sites in the Pacific and in Europe. So that all generations will understand the price of freedom and be inspired by what they learn. Now, World War II, as you know, was also involved on the home front, and Florida is no exception to that. I know many of you might not be originally Florida residents, but for those of you who were, might know General Paul Tibbets, the Enola Gay pilot who took the atomic bomb to Hiroshima, was based here for a while. There's Florida bonds. There were U-boats off of the east coast and the west coast of Florida. There's a large water pipe that had to be built all the way down to Key West to carry water to the base that was there. You have coastal watchers looking for enemy ships. So Florida is no exception to any other state in the United States. It was deeply involved in the war effort, and the entire country was tied together. In fact, the most famous mantra, and you all who go back to that generation know that when sacrifices were made because of rationing and couldn't buy gasoline or tires or what have you, the common explanation was, we're all in this together. Well, part of the challenge is here that the Omaha Beach and the Atlantic Wall of Adolf Hitler was designed to make it to make an amphibious landing near to impossible. And these obstacles there were designed to, when boats hit them, in high tide, they would be underwater and boats would flip over. And they had also entrenched machine gun nests, large artillery, pillboxes all over the Normandy coastline, and actually all the way on up to Denmark and all the way down to Spain and France. So it was next to impossible to think about going ashore, and Hitler thought that he pretty much had it covered. So this is what our boys faced on D-Day. D-Day was just one day in a bloody war that left 65 million people dead in Asia and in Europe. That's not just military, that's 2/3 were civilians, including the Holocaust victims. So on June 6, 1944, everything was really at stake at this particular moment. The whole outcome of the war was at stake, and the fate of civilization itself. This was a struggle and a battle for freedom and democracy versus the forces of tyranny and dictatorship. And we were going ashore to defend our freedom. And the leaders of the world at that time, among our allies and our enemies, Winston Churchill called the D-Day invasion as the most difficult and complicated operation to ever take place in the history of the world. There were 150,000 men that went ashore on that day, 7,000 ships and landing craft, 5,000 airplanes of all kinds, and the airborne drops as well as the amphibious assaults on the ground. It was indeed difficult and complicated. In fact, it was so complicated to achieve that Hitler, after he'd conquered the entire continent, was afraid to launch an amphibious assault on Great Britain when his Luftwaffe couldn't bring Great Britain to their knees before we got into the war. But Hitler realized how important it was that he said the destruction of the enemy's landing, wherever it might occur, on the western shores of the continent. We'd already come up through Italy by that time. The destruction of the enemy's landing is the sole decisive factor in the whole conduct of the war, and hence its final results. He was right. We made the landing and he didn't stop us, and it did result in the destruction of the Third Reich. So this was really a big, big deal. And when Steve Ambrose and I thought of doing something to honor the sacrifices of World War II, we felt like, as a couple of history professors sitting in that gazebo, that doing the whole war was too big a challenge. A lot of people, we found out after we decided on D-Day, thought that we couldn't even do that. And in fact, we almost didn't do it. And Senator Stevens told Steve Ambrose and me on the day before we opened that if we would take on and do the whole war, the Mediterranean, the China, Burma, India, the island hopping, Alaska, his state, was actually invaded, the only state that was invaded by the Japanese, he would help us out. Well, we'd never had an offer like that in the first 10 years. And so even though Steve and I thought we were done, we couldn't turn down those two senators. So we said, we'll try to figure out how to do the whole war and change our name to the National World War II Museum. And we're going to make people feel great about America and lifted up by the American spirit, which we think made a difference in World War II against the Hitler Youth. And we want people to leave feeling proud of their country and proud of what America achieved in that period of 1941 to 45, when it took all of us. It took every American. It took all of our material resources, our human resources, our economic resources, our technological resources, and our spiritual resources in the fight for civilization itself. And we feel that the American spirit made a difference. And we want young people, we want future generations to know what was at stake and to know what so many Americans died for. And their freedom and our democracy is what they fought for, and what we still want to remember and remind all Americans